Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're breaking down the Saturday, December 23rd slate of college football DFS for the bowl games. We've got a nice little 7-game slate here this Saturday, and we've got a lot of transfer portal mayhem going on in these 7 games. So it's going to be really fun to break down just who we can put into our lineups, what we can expect from all 7 of these games, and how we can build some winning lineups on DraftKings and FanDuel through all of this madness and through all this misinformation that we have right now with the craziness that is college football bowl season. So we got an episode here for you that's going to have a lot of information, a lot of guys, a lot of names that we're going to talk about, and it's going to feature a little bit of speculation as well because some of these teams you don't necessarily know who's going to come in right away and step up after some of these big name guys leave through the transfer portal. You know, you kind of saw the same thing with Western Kentucky in the famous Toastery Bowl on Tuesday where they bring in the third string quarterback and he ends up being the hero as opposed to the guy who actually started the game. So definitely a nice little twist to have a 7-game slate here on this Saturday. It feels more like a traditional college football slate. We've got a lot of information to grind through and a lot of stuff that we got here for you here on this episode to help you build those winning DFS lineups. Now, the schedule for the next week is going to be a little bit different as you could probably expect because of the holiday season. So I'm actually going out of town on Thursday afternoon. So what that means is I'm going to try to get the NFL episode out before I leave. I'm going to try to get that up Wednesday night. If that does not happen, then it just does not happen. It's a busy time. I hope you understand, especially as a guy who has a 3.5-month-old daughter at home. It's a crazy time, but it's a lot of fun, especially the first holiday with her. So the schedule will be a little bit different. I'll be back in town after Christmas, and hopefully we'll be able to pick right back up with these college football previews for the rest of the bowl season, as well as college basketball previews as well. We're also going to have a big season-long golf preview coming out the week after Christmas, so make sure you hit that subscribe button to the channel, so that way you can get notified when all the episodes drop, including the college football, college basketball, golf, and NFL episodes. And then also, if there's any updates on the show, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks, or I guess X, I should start saying now, at Mike's Money Picks. That way, if there's any updates, I'll do my best to tweet them out. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. All right, that does it for the introduction. So let's go ahead and dive into this 7-game bowl slate and just how can we attack each of these 7 games from a DFS angle. All right, so before we break it down position by position for this slate, let's talk about each of the individual games themselves. So we do have a 7-game slate, and we've got the point spreads here courtesy of FanDuel Sportsbook. And so we're going to talk about the games that you want to target in terms of a DFS perspective, kind of from highest to lowest in terms of the game total. So the highest total of all the games on Saturday is going to be the Idaho Potato Bowl between Georgia State and Utah State. This one has a total of, when I did my research, it was 60.5, but right now it's 59.5. And it's implied to be Utah State 31-29 about. I always round to the nearest point when I do these just because, you can't actually go out on the field and score 0.25 of a point. So projected to be Utah State 31-29, both teams over 28 points. It is the only game that has that distinction here on this slate. The second projected highest scoring game of the day is the Camellia Bowl between Arkansas State and Northern Illinois. That one has a total of 53.5. Implied to be Arkansas State 29-26. So another decent, both teams projected to score some points in that game. One that's a little more lopsided but still has a decent total is the Hawaii Bowl between Coastal Carolina and San Jose State. Coastal Carolina is dealing with a lot of their key players in the portal, so that's why I think this spread got so big. But San Jose State is 9.5-point favorites, implied to be a total of about 31-21 in favor of San Jose State. Then you have the Ventures Bowl, kind of right in the middle, which has the biggest spread of the day between South Alabama and Eastern Michigan. South Alabama is 16.5-point favorites. The game is implied to be about 31-15 in favor of the South Alabama Jaguars. Then you have the Birmingham Bowl, which features the carcass of the Duke Blue Devils and what's left of them. They're 7.5-point dogs to Troy, the Sun Belt champions, and that game is implied to be Troy 26-19. So not a whole lot of interest there on the Duke side with them only being implied to score 19 points. Then you do have the Las Vegas Bowl between Utah and Northwestern, and these last 2 games of the day really feature some really ugly game totals, the last 2 that we're going to mention. So this one's Utah versus Northwestern, implied to be about 24-18 in favor of Utah. And then you have the Armed Forces Bowl between James Madison and Air Force, where James Madison has seemingly their entire roster in the portal, and they're still 2.5-point favorites over Air Force. That one is implied to be about 22-20 in favor of James Madison. So definitely some games there at the bottom where you're not going to be wanting to target. You're not going to want to get a whole lot of exposure to those games, because if these teams are only implied to score 24 and 18 points, like how much scoring is there going to be from a fantasy perspective anyway? So Now, let's go ahead and dive in and break it down position by position. So let's start with the quarterback position now. What I think about this slate is I don't think this is a slate where you have to lock in two quarterbacks. On DraftKings and FanDuel, you get the super flex spot where you can play two quarterbacks. And more often than not, I'm automatically just picking a second quarterback in that super flex spot because quarterbacks give you the highest upside. They give you a safe floor. It gives you a really good option if you're going to game stack to get two quarterbacks going against each other and hope that the scoring just pinballs. But I don't think this is a slate where you have to lock in two quarterbacks. I think there's a lot of very questionable situations at quarterback on this slate, and I think there's a lot of quarterbacks that, even though they're solid, they're kind of priced up a little higher than I would expect, or I think that there's more value upside in playing some of these running backs and wide receivers on this slate. So let's go ahead and break it down. So the top price quarterback on the slate on DraftKings is Siobhan Cordero of San Jose State. I anticipate he will not be the highest quarterback on FanDuel. I've not seen those salaries yet. FanDuel has not loved Siobhan Cordero all season long, so that's why I would anticipate that. He is the highest price quarterback on the slate, $7,900 on DraftKings, and his team has implied 31 points in this bowl game. But really, where's the upside, right? Like $7,900, I want at least three times the salary, as a bare minimum if I want to cash in a GPP or have a chance in a cash game, which would be about 24 points. And he's only eclipsed that number twice all season long. And in fact, he's never been higher than 25 points all season long. So I just really question the upside with Cordero. I don't think he's a terrible play because of how much his team is expected to score, but I really do question the upside with, kind of just a general low volume and hasn't really had a big game so far this season. I don't think he's really worth that price tag that he's got on DraftKings. Now, Jalen Rayner, who, fun fact, actually went to the high school that's about 10 minutes from my house. I coach high school football, and I do not coach the school he went to, but he attended a school that's really close to my house right now. He was a really good player in high school, and so it's not shocking to see what he's doing here at Arkansas State. So if you look at his game log, Rayner was really limited by some of the Sun Belt's best defenses, like South Alabama, like Troy. He had some big-time games against lesser defenses, which is kind of what I think he's going to have a chance to do against this Northern Illinois team. He only started 10 games this season. He took over a few games in, and he's gone over 23 points in 5 of them. In my opinion, he has a significantly higher upside than Siobhan Cordero because he also has 2 games of over 40 fantasy points or more this season. And, Arkansas State's projected 29 points. That's only 2 less than Coastal Carolina. It's one of the highest numbers on the slate. So Jalen Rayner, to me, has a lot of things going for him. And he does have some pretty big rushing totals as well. So he does give you a little bit of dual threat upside. I think Jalen Rayner does have a lot going for him. But my favorite quarterback play of the day is going to be Darren Granger of Georgia State. So first off, this is the best game environment of the slate, right? Like Georgia State, Utah State, this is probably most likely going to be the highest scoring game of the day. And Georgia State also has their workhorse running back Marcus Carroll in the transfer portal, which might make them a little more pass happy. But what I really like is the fact that in shootouts, Granger has been at his absolute best. He averages 23.9 fantasy points per game in games where Georgia State gets to 20 real points. And if you make that number 24, his average goes up even higher, above 24 fantasy points. So I really like the fact that Georgia State's offense is very correlated to what Granger does, both with his legs and on the ground. They're implied to score 29 points in this one against Utah State. So I really think that this is a really good spot for Granger. And I think that if they're going to score 29, it's going to have to be with Granger doing it, not, kind of what's left with their running back situation. So I think Granger is probably the quarterback that is in the best situation out of anybody on the entire slate. Now, from there, we got Rocky Lombardi of Northern Illinois. First off, one of the best football names out there, right? Like Rocky Lombardi. The guy sounds like he should be a linebacker. And to me, he's a game stacking option, right? Like he's taking on Arkansas State and Jalen Rayner. He has not been a super consistent fantasy scorer all season long. He just doesn't have a whole lot of passing volume and a whole lot of passing attempts. But his best games have come in shootouts. He's only scored over 20 fantasy points or more in games that featured over 60 total points scored. So if this game does, in fact, end up becoming more of a shootout, then, Rocky Lombardi could be a guy that you might need to have on your roster. And so I would be interested in playing Lombardi if I'm playing Rayner on the other side, but probably not as a play in his own right. Gunnar Watson is going to be drawing the start for Troy. And look, he's just he's all right. Like, he's $6,700. He's a reasonable price tag. He has a bunch of reasonable performance, but this is a team that loves to run the football. And in this game against Duke, I think they're going to try to run the football, and the presence of that rushing attack does limit Gunnar Watson's upside a little bit. I think there's worse plays out there, but I think there's better also. You've also got Ethan Vasco, who is going to be starting for Coastal Carolina, and he has been quite interesting in the 3 games that he started for Coastal. He has performances of 15.9, 23.7, and 38.2 fantasy points in his 3 starts. That's quite a big range of outcomes. And I gotta say, I think there's worse plays out there. Coastal Carolina is implied to score 21 points against San Jose State, and if he accounts for 3 touchdowns, this is offense that uses their quarterback as a runner heavily. If he accounts for 3 touchdowns, he could give you a pretty solid performance, and I think he's going to be pretty sneakily lowly owned. So I think Ethan Vasco is a guy who is going to make my player pool on Saturday. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about all of the uncertainties, like all the guys that we don't necessarily know what's going to happen. Those are like the last of the guys that I would say are lead pipe locks going to start and going to take every snap for their team coming up on this Saturday, right? So after that, you've got Carter Bradley of South Alabama, who's a good player. He's been a very good collegiate quarterback the last 2 years. But I don't know if he's going to be able to play. He played against Texas State in their last game, but apparently re-aggravated their injury and had to leave early. I don't know what his status is. There hasn't been much reporting on it. If he does not go, it would be Desmond Trotter, who is the backup, who is only $6,000, has looked very capable. And South Alabama is one of the highest implied scoring teams on the slate. So Desmond Trotter would definitely make my player pool if, in fact, Carter Bradley does end up missing. Cooper Legas of Utah State, is also doubtful, is what he's listed as on DraftKings. He's not on the depth chart for the team's bowl game, which would tend to for me to think that he's not going to play. And if he does not play, Levi Williams would be the guy who is going to get the start. Levi Williams played the last game against New Mexico. It pretty much broke the entire slate. He was only $5,400 and he scored 51 fantasy points. He's a big dual threat guy. He ran for 150 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. And to me, Levi Williams is very much in play if we're not going to get any update on Cooper Legas. And I really think that if Williams does play, it kind of lessens my hopes for the Utah State receivers a little bit, knowing that Williams is more of a dual threat and he's probably going to have a little less passing volume than Legas would have. Now for Air Force, we know Air Force is still running the triple option like all the service academies do. Zach Larrier has been out for a while, but he could, quote unquote, be available for the bowl game. Jensen Jones will be the guy that gets the start if he doesn't. And look, it's a triple option offense, so the quarterback's going to be running the ball a lot, but they're going up against James Madison, who's statistically one of the best run defenses in all of college football, so it's hard to get excited about either of those guys. Luke Botari figures to get the start for Utah. He started their last game of the season against Colorado. And if it goes to show you how much they trust him, he threw 10 passes in that game. I don't necessarily think he's a very high upside option because there's not going to be a lot of passing volume for him, and Northwestern's a pretty solid defense. Speaking of Northwestern, Ben Bryant has been really solid in games for them when he's gotten to play. Averages about 16 fantasy points per game, has multiple performances over 20 fantasy points, but he's taken on Utah, one of the best defenses in all of college football, so that kind of tempers my expectations a little bit for him. On a slate like this, if you don't have to play a guy going against one of the best defenses, then don't. So I don't think he will have my interest for that reason. For James Madison, Alonze Barnett III, a guy who I coached against in high school. He plays at one of the rival schools that I coach at. He is a guy that figures to start for James Madison. I haven't seen any reporting otherwise. He would be my guess to start. I don't think it's a lead pipe lock, but he would be the guy that I would expect to start. And $5,700, maybe he's worth it, maybe because of the price tag. Eastern Michigan also has co-starters listed with Udengwu and McCoy. So I am not interested in playing somebody from Eastern Michigan. Look, if you're going to list co-starters for quarterback for a bowl game, that significantly limits your upside from a fantasy perspective, and I'm just out on both of those guys. All right, that does it for the quarterback position. So let's go ahead and switch gears just a second and talk about some running backs. Now, before we get started with the running backs, I do want to mention there are a few places where you can get more information from me. First off, we mentioned this already, but you can follow me on X at Mike's Money Picks. I do my best to tweet out the DFS rundown for every college football, college basketball slate. If there's ever any injury news that kind of updates my thoughts, I try to get it out there. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have just directly to me out there on X. And I try my best to respond to those. If there's also any updates with the podcast in terms of what's going to be on YouTube, audio, whatever, I also get it out on there as well. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube and on the podcast feed. Look, it's just a lot of fun to be a part of that community. We've got a lot of smart people who play a lot of DFS for a lot of different sports, and we're just constantly bouncing ideas, having discussions, and then sweating it out together, and it's a lot of fun. DFS is a lot more fun when you have somebody to share it with, and we've had some pretty big winners in there in the college basketball section, and we're hoping to, for bowl season, get some in the college football section as well. So head on over there if you are interested in joining. It is 100% free, and then also I do write a full article for every college football and college basketball slate onto my Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I profile all of my core plays as well as kind of my attack strategy and lineup building strategy for the slate. I'm not going to sit here and guarantee that you can just plug in all those plays and immediately win GPPs. It's not that easy, but I do promise that you can get a lot of good information, a lot of good ideas and strategies that you can use to build some very sound and very successful DFS lineups. And then lastly, if you're looking to try anything new this college football bowl season, or, maybe NFL playoff season, or, a lot of states, we got some sports betting getting legalized on January 1st. If you're looking to try anything new, head on over to signupexpert.com/Mike's Picks. We are partnered with SignUpExpert, and what they do is they give you the best offers and promo codes for any DFS, player prop, or sportsbook site. All the main sportsbooks are on there, as well as Underdog, Jock Market, and more. And by getting those best offers and promo codes, it'll even sync to your location and show you what is legal in your state or province. So you're guaranteed that you're going to get the best promo code for a new user for what is available to you. And I highly recommend it if you're going to try to sign up for any new website. All right, so let's go ahead now and break down the running back position. So to me, this slate has some elite running backs. I mentioned how this doesn't necessarily have to be a 2 quarterback slate. Well, I think this could possibly be a 3 or even 4 running back slate, because I think there are a lot of appealing options, and a lot of those appealing options are at the top of the board. So if you can save some salary at the quarterback and wide receiver position, you can afford to pay up for these elite level running backs. So you look at the running backs at the top of the board. You got San Jose State's Kyrie Robinson. You got Troy's Kamani Vidal. You got Northern Illinois' Ontario Brown. All 3 of these guys have multiple games this season of over 30 fantasy points or more. Not a lot of running backs in college football possess that upside. They all are, pretty much workhorse backs in their backfield. If they split time, it's not a whole lot. And they've all shown the ability to have these big time performances, right? Now, of the 3 of them, Arkansas State and Coastal Carolina are below average run defenses. So that would give me a little bit of a boost to Kyrie Robinson and Ontario Brown. Duke is actually a pretty tough run defense, which makes it a little bit tougher sledding for Vidal. But like I said, with all 3 of these guys, the workloads are just so good that I really think you can play all 3 of them. And I'm going to be prioritizing getting at least 1, if not 2 of these guys in every single one of my lineups this weekend. Now, Eastern Michigan's also a pretty good team for the running back room. They've got Samson Evans and Jalen Jackson. They've been a pretty steady committee all season long. It has been Evans who has edged out Jackson a little bit recently, though. Evans has a combined 50 fantasy points in his last 2 games, whereas Jackson has not been as effective, only has 23. Evans has outcarried him very so slightly in that span as well. So I would give the slight edge to Samson Evans. And look, with this Eastern Michigan team, we already mentioned how they're playing co-starters at quarterback. Well, if you don't have any confidence in your quarterback, you're going to run the football. And so both these running backs are going to have plenty of opportunity to run. Like I said, I think Evans gets the edge from me, but we've mentioned on this podcast before how sometimes in DFS, the better play becomes not the better play because of ownership. And so if it does end up looking like nobody's playing Jalen Jackson, that might make him a sneaky good play, because both of these guys are going to see a good bit of carries here this weekend. Now, for Utah State, Devon Booth has kind of been their guy over the course of the season, but I got to say right now, right this second, I'm not that interested. I'm just not. Last game against New Mexico, he only had 7 carries, only 4.3 fantasy points. He's not a guy who gets a big carry total anyway. He doesn't even average 10 carries per game. And Levi Williams, the quarterback who's likely to be starting, was their primary option as a runner in their most recent game. You also saw the backup, Rasul Faison, who got 18 carries in that game against New Mexico. He also had 22 carries earlier in November against Nevada. So Faison is kind of rivaling Devon Booth, and it makes it really hard to play Devon Booth. And I think Faison at $4,300 is an interesting play. But with Levi Williams being the quarterback and having a primary runner as the quarterback, it definitely makes me be less interested in both Devon Booth and Rasul Faison for the Utah State Aggies. Now for Duke. Duke has played a running back committee for the better part of the last 2 seasons with Jordan Waters and Jacquez Moore. Well, half of that committee is now in the transfer portal because Jordan Waters is already headed to NC State. He's got a nice big long drive from from Durham to Raleigh, which is, I'm being facetious because it's like 5 miles. And so he will be playing for NC State next season. Well, the question is, what happens with the Duke backfield? Because if all of a sudden what was a committee is no longer not a committee, what does that do for Jacquez Moore for Duke? Well, if he gets 100% of the carries, he's going to be a very interesting target. However, if the committee continues and you see Jalen Coleman get 50% of the carries like had been happening for Jordan Waters, then Jalen Coleman at only $4,400 becomes a very intriguing play. In fact, we've seen Jalen Coleman already get double-digit carries in 2 of the last 3 games. So I think that that's a very intriguing situation. I think between the 2 of them, I would probably be more interested in Jalen Coleman than in Jacquez Moore just because of the price tag and because I tend to think that teams who play running back committees are more likely to stick with a committee, even if one of those guys ends up, not playing in the game. So I would just tend to think that they're going to be a little bit more of a committee approach, and that's going to open up some opportunities for Coleman. Now, for South Alabama, they're an intriguing situation because they have one of the best running backs in college football, Damian Webb. But he is now headed pro. He's headed to the NFL draft. And this is a pretty run-heavy team who may be playing with a backup quarterback. So this could be a very lucrative situation for a running back. Well, Kentrell Bullock has not played very much over the last 2 months of the season at all. And all indications are that he's going to be available for the bowl game, and he will probably be serving as the number 1 running back considering how much he was used at the start of the season. But is he 100% healthy? And in a bowl game, is that something you want to risk? I don't know. I think it opens up a possibility for Braylon McReynolds to, kind of be a part of the offense as well. He had 19 carries in their last game against Texas State, and LaDamian Webb was active for that game also. Kentrell Bullock was not, so that's why you saw the boost for McReynolds there. So it would not shock me at all if McReynolds does end up seeing a lot of the carries, but all indications are that it's going to be Bullock ending up with a lot of the carries. Moral of the story here, we don't really know what's going to happen, but this is an offense that's going to run the football quite a lot. You got 2 guys at a very affordable price tag that you have as options. Now, for Arkansas State, they've been a little bit of a committee this season with Jacquez Cross as well as Zach Wallace. Zach Wallace has been kind of banged up, hasn't really he missed the last game of the season, what I was looking for there. So he missed the last game of the season for Arkansas State. But Jacquez Cross and him have been kind of splitting carries for the entire season. Both of them have had explosive games so far this season, so I think they're both in play. With this game kind of expected to be what it is in one of the highest scoring games of the day, I could absolutely see myself getting to one of these running backs if I am not playing a piece of the Arkansas State passing game. Now, I do like the Utah guys here on this slate. So Utah, like we mentioned, their starting quarterback, they let him throw 10 times against Colorado. And they ran the ball quite a bit. Jaquindon Jackson is the normal starter. We've talked about him over the course of the season. He's a converted quarterback who came on strong at the end of the last season. He's really explosive, really quality player. But the problem is that he got really banged up this year, and it kind of limited his upside. It kind of limited his explosiveness. But now he's got a month to heal. And so could he be all the way back, good to go now that he's, good for the bowl game? I think it's a possibility. It's also a possibility that they kind of, don't get extra mileage on the Ferrari and give a lot of usage to Jalen Glover, because Jalen Glover is also a very capable running back. He's only $4,300 on DraftKings. In the last game against Colorado, Jaquindon Jackson got 21 carries and Jalen Glover got 17. I think it's very likely that both of these guys figure into the game plan. And so for that reason, I'm willing to play both of them. I wouldn't play both of them together, but I'm willing to roll out Jaquindon Jackson, and I'm willing to roll out Jalen Glover as well, especially because that price tag for Jalen Glover, only $4,300. That's not as big of a goal to get to as some of the other runners on this slate. Now, Cam Porter is a Northwestern running back that is actually not been bad, but it's been workload dependent. He gets a lot of carries, he gets a lot of touches, and he's used in the passing game as well. And I think he's going to be dependent on that workload to end up with a big performance, because Utah is the defense he's going up against. It's one of the toughest rushing defenses in all college football. It's one of the best overall defenses in all college football. So I think Cam Porter is a workload dependent play. But at only $5,200, if you're telling me the guy's going to get 20 touches, that's pretty reasonable. And so I think that it's a very reasonable play for Cam Porter, especially at his price tag. Now let's talk about the situations that have all of the uncertainty. So Air Force, we talked about their triple option offense, right? Well, Emmanuel Michel has been a revelation for them this season, and he's been pretty big. Problem is he hasn't done squat over the last 2 months of the season. He's been banged up. He's missed games. He hasn't been used a whole lot. And what they've done is they've gone to Dylan Carson as their primary dive guy on the triple option. He's been getting a lot of carries. And if Air Force is going to have any success, it's probably going to be with Dylan Carson. But like we talked about at the top, James Madison's one of the best rushing defenses in all college football. So I have no desire to play any of the Air Force guys with the uncertainty around who's getting the carries and the tough matchup that lies ahead. James Madison is not really in any better situation. Their top two backs, Kaylon Black and Tyson Lawton, entered the transfer portal. DraftKings seems to expect that Latrell Palmer is going to be the guy, but I don't really know. There's not really much of history between any of these guys getting any carries after Black and Lawton. So it's a situation that I'm avoiding. Coastal Carolina is a team that has been playing a running back committee all season long. And so I'm going to be avoiding that situation as well. They don't give any of their guys enough opportunity to really break through. And none of the guys hit the portal either. So it's just not a great situation to target. And then Georgia State is another team that I have genuinely no clue who's going to be in the backfield for them. Marcus Carroll was their workhorse running back. And by workhorse, I mean workhorse. None of the other guys really did much of anything. You've got Freddie Brock, who has 6 carries on the season. And then you have KZ Adams, who has 35 carries on the season. So maybe it's Adams that ends up getting the workload. I don't know 100%, but I definitely... it's a situation I think you can avoid with the uncertainty. However, knowing that Marcus Carroll was the workhorse running back, is it possible that one of those two guys in and just takes over Marcus Carroll's role and gets 25 carries? Absolutely, it's a possibility. I'm not ruling it out, but I don't know which one it's going to be, which makes it a lot tougher to target in DFS. I think if I had to pick one for Georgia State, it would probably be KZ Adams, just because of what he's done over the course of the season, but it's really hard to get excited about that. All right, so that does it for the running back situation. So let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then let's talk about the pass catchers. All right, so let's break down these wide receivers. We're going to break it down by salary, but also by game. So we're going to kind of go team by team, game by game, starting from the receivers that are at the top of the board to try to get the best feel for the slate in terms of where do we want to pay up and where do we want to, try to find values from. So Utah State actually has a rare distinction of having the 2 top wide receivers on the board on DraftKings this week. They are Jalen Royals and Terrell Vaughn. They are very good wide receivers. They have been very productive all season long. They played with multiple quarterbacks, and they average about 42 combined fantasy points per game. If you were to just plug and play both of them, I think in a cash game lineup, I think that's actually a very legitimate strategy. If you just plug and play both of them, that's over 3 times value for their salary if they just have an average performance. The only thing that would be a slight modicum of concern is the fact that with Levi Williams at quarterback in the New Mexico game, they did not combine for their normal 42 fantasy points. They only combined for 37 fantasy points, which is still not terrible from 2 guys that are going to combine for a little under 14K. Now, they're kind of their third option in the receiving core. Micah Davis, has been missing for a few games, and we haven't really seen anybody really kind of take hold of it like in a big way. Kobe Bowman saw a little bit of usage in their last game against New Mexico. Otto Tia hasn't played in a long, long time. So I don't really know what to make of the receiving core outside of Royals and Vaughn. I think I would probably be sticking to those two. And with Levi Williams, under center, I think that the upside is probably capped for them, but I definitely think that they're both still very viable and in play options. If you ask me to pick between one or the two of them, I got to go with my guy Jalen Royals because he was much better last game with Levi Williams at quarterback. He had 27 fantasy points as opposed to only 10 from Terrell Vaughn. Now, on the other side of this game, you've got Georgia State, who had a very clear wide receiver one. It was Robert Lewis. He's already committed to Auburn, so he is already gone from Georgia State. So Talik Williams has been operating as their wide receiver two all season long, and he hasn't really gotten a price jump with Robert Lewis being out, which I thought was kind of interesting. So the question becomes, with Robert Lewis out, does Talik Williams kind of vault into that wide receiver one role? Do they keep Talik Williams in kind of the role he had and try to find a new guy to fit into Robert Lewis's spot? I don't know exactly what the plan is. Wide receiver is a lot harder to predict in this way than the running back position is, because especially if you've ever been in any kind of high school or college football offense, there's a lot difference between playing the slot, playing out wide, how these teams utilize different wide receivers. I know when I worked in film at Charlotte, we had 4 wide receiver positions that pretty much, you were only playing that one position out of the 4, and we didn't really kind of cross-train guys in that way. So I don't really know what to make of any guys that are going to, kind of see a boost for some of these guys that are in the portal. But what I do know is that in recent games, you have seen Jakari Carter and Kadarius Thompson play a lot of snaps. So those would be the two guys that I would think are going to be out there on the field with Talik Williams, which is saying something. And they're both under $4,000 on DraftKings. It's very affordable. You've also got the tight end, Amon Green. No, not that Amon Green, but his name is Amon Green. He is the tight end for Georgia State. He's $4,600. He is in play for me as well. But with the void of Robert Lewis, I definitely think there's going to be somebody step up for this Georgia State passing offense. And you guys know how much I like Darren Granger at the top. Well, I got to go with one of these Georgia State wide receivers to stack him up. Now, for San Jose State, they have the next price wide receiver on the board, and I kind of don't really get it, if I'm being honest. They got Nick Nash sitting here at $6,400 on DraftKings, and I don't understand why he is that expensive. Yes, he is their clear number one receiver. Yes, he is their best target earner, but where has the production been? Kind of like with Siobhan Cordero at quarterback. Like, he's a good player, but the production is not worthy of that price tag. And so I kind of think that if you're playing him, you're going to really hope for just this, San Jose State offense to just go nuclear, which is something that it hasn't really done very often this season. There's other guys with other salaries that I would rather bet on than Nick Nash, in my opinion. Now, for Coastal Carolina, the last 2 seasons in their offense have been dominated by the 2 receivers, Jared Brown and Sam Pinckney. They used to have one of the most creative, fun offenses in all college football back when Jamie Chadwell was there. It's not that creative and fun anymore. In fact, Jared Brown has found it so uncreative and unfun that he's already committed to South Carolina, so he will not be playing in this bowl game. So what that leaves is just of these 2 great receivers that have been, had great careers at Coastal Carolina. You only got one of them left in Sam Pinckney. And so could that mean a big-time game from Sam Pinckney in it seems like he's been there forever, so I'm going to assume it's probably his final game as a Coastal Carolina shot to clear. It could be a big game for him. Projecting who is going to get the snaps vacated by Jared Brown is kind of tough because they do not play a whole lot of wide receivers. The guy that has been on the field the most has been Jamison Tucker, so he might see a little bit of a boost with Jared Brown out, and I really wouldn't honestly know how to project it after that. I think it would be purely speculation after Pinckney and Tucker for this Coastal Carolina offense. Now, next up, we got Northern Illinois. Trayvon Rudolph has been a really good receiver for them. If you played the Maction slates back in November, he was really good on a lot of those Maction slates. And he's been their consistent wide receiver one ever since the injury to Kasper Rukaewicz. With Rukaewicz, though, I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. He hasn't played since week 6, so I don't really think he's going to give it a go for a bowl game. Just my guess. So I think Trayvon Rudolph would continue to be the wide receiver one, and he would really be the only guy on Northern Illinois that I'm interested in. Keep in mind, this is a very interesting game to game stack, with it being one of the highest totals of the day, and Rocky Lombardi being really good in game stacks. So I think that a little Lombardi-Rudolph stack, I don't think that it's going to be very highly owned. I don't think it's very likely that would be very successful, but I could see that being like a GPP MVP winning combination. Like it's not out of the realm of possibility that a Lombardi Rudolph stack ends up being very good. Now, on the Arkansas State side of things, I think they very obviously have a one stacking partner as well. I would much prefer to stack Courtney Jackson with quarterback Jalen Raynor than any other option. He's been the most consistent target earner, and he has 4 games over 20 fantasy points, so he does give you a legitimate upside. So I think that this Arkansas State-Northern Illinois game could be pretty sneaky in terms of they have 2 very clear wide receiver ones. And so if you just go quarterback, wide receiver one, and it's pretty cheap, you could afford some of the other higher price running backs and wide receivers on the slate. I think it's definitely an option. Like I said, when I talked about it with Rudolph, is it a likely outcome? Probably not, but is it one that I could see a clear pathway to and could see a very viable strategy for lineup building to? Absolutely. I think that's a possibility. Now, South Alabama had one of the best wide receivers in all of college football enter the transfer portal. They had Colin Lacey this year, who averaged 24 DraftKings points per game. They're South Alabama. And he is now in the transfer portal. He's heading to Louisville, so he's going to get the Jamari Thrash role. He's going to get fed next year. So with Lacey out, somebody is going to have to pick up the production, right? So their wide receiver 2 all season long has been Jamal Pritchett. He's been a very productive player as well, averaging 15 fantasy points per game. He has had a game of over 40. He's had 2 games of 20 fantasy points or more. He's an explosive playmaker, and he is worth a look. He is worth a mention. So if he gets all of his normal Pritchett targets and then gets some of those Lacey targets as well, he has a very, very legitimate chance to break the slate and really exceed his salary at only $5,900. And by the way, they have one of the highest implied team totals of the slates and are big favorites to win this game. Now, in terms of guys other than Pritchett that might have some upside, Javon Ivory and DJ Thomas Jones are really the only 2 that have seen regular playing time with Lacey and Pritchett also in the lineup. So I don't really think I could project it after those 2, if I'm being honest, but I feel pretty confident saying that those 2 guys will be on the field, and those 2 guys will have a chance to see a little bit of a boost because of the Colin Lacey transferring. Like last game that they played against Texas State, DJ Thomas Jones had 3 touchdowns. He had 9 catches in that game, and Javon Ivory had 4 for 85 and a touchdown in that game. So these guys are regular players. They're going to be out there on the field, and could one of them see that Lacey role? Absolutely. I think it's a possibility. And if you're playing, these angles with these South Alabama guys, I think that's a very high upside position to play either Pritchett, Ivory, or Thomas Jones. Now, on the other side of this game for Eastern Michigan, they have one of the lowest totals on the slate, so it's not a great situation to target. But I do want to give a shout out to Tanner New. He's been one of the most consistent target earners, especially on these midweek action slates that they had a lot of back in October and November. And he's a really consistent player. He operates primarily out of the slot. He has a low average depth of target. I think he's a decent cash game play normally, but with their uncertainty at quarterback and them playing co-starters at the quarterback position, I think that definitely limits his upside. And I probably won't be getting to Tanner New for that reason. Now, Duke has one of the most interesting profiles out there. They have Jordan Moore, who in the games since Riley Leonard has gotten hurt and they've been playing with backup quarterbacks, has been really, really good. His production has gone way up since Riley Leonard got hurt, which is not what anybody would have expected. He's had over 23 fantasy points in each of the last 3 games. That is just a staggering statistic, and I think he's got to be considered for your lineups. I think he can be played as a one-off play, unstacked with their quarterback, and I think that if you're going to play any Duke Blue Devil, he's probably the guy I would go with. But keep in mind, Troy is one of the better defenses on the slate, and they can definitely limit his upside more so than the 3 defenses that he's had his good game against have come. Now, for Troy, we talked about their profiles on Conference Championship weekend. You've got Chris Lewis and Jabri Barber, where Barber has been the guy who has caught more passes. He's been the guy who has got more yards. He's been the more consistent option. He just doesn't really ever score the touchdowns. And then Chris Lewis gets touchdowns, right? And that kind of played itself out in the Conference Championship game against Appalachian State. So if you are a touchdown regression guy, Jabri Barber would be the Troy receiver that I would target. If you are a just give me fantasy points by any means necessary kind of guy, Chris Lewis would probably be the guy that you would want to target. But these 2 profiles, it's funny how we mentioned the exact type of profile they have heading into that game, and they match the exact profile in that game with no sort of touchdown regression or any kind of predictive statistics at work. So that's the Troy receiving core. I probably wouldn't consider any 2 outside of those guys. Now for James Madison, Elijah Surratt, who has been a really good playmaker for them over the course of the season, is in the transfer portal. And so their other big-time wide receiver, Reggie Brown, could see a big uptick in workload. He has had 3 games over 35 fantasy points so far this season. So he's got a lot of upside, and if he gets some of those Surratt targets, he's going to be in for a big-time game. And then Phoenix Sproles is the guy who operates out of the slot for James Madison. He had 11 catches in their last game against Coastal Carolina. These two guys are really the only two I would feel comfortable playing in this James Madison offense. I don't really know who's going to get the playing time after those two because they had been pretty straightforward throughout the whole season that it was Surratt, it was Brown, it was Sproles, and then it was the tight end Horton, who's also in the transfer portal. So I don't really know what's going to be after those three. So I really wouldn't feel comfortable playing those two. And the quarterback play is not going to be the same. They're used to Jordan McLeod, who's had a really good season for JMU, and now it's going to be Alonze Barnett. So I don't really – it's hard to get too excited about these guys unless they just, pop off for like a 15-target type of game. Last team I'm going to talk about, last game I'm going to talk about, you do have with Northwestern some guys who have had resurgences under Ben Bryant being under center. AJ Henning as well as Cam Johnson have had some big-time performances with Ben Bryant under center, but they're playing Utah. And it's really hard to get excited about a guy that's playing Utah. So I'm probably just going to pass on those two if I'm being honest. On the Utah side, their best receiver, Devon Vele, is in the portal. He's not in the portal. He declared for the draft. I was wrong on that one. So what I do know is that the receivers that are going to be on the field, they're going to be Money Parks and Munir McClain. How much production they're going to have, I don't know. How much Utah is going to throw the ball, I don't know. But those are going to be the two that are going to be out there on the field. There's not a whole lot of speculation about that. That's one situation where you don't have to speculate about, but you also do have to question the legitimate upside of playing one of those guys. So with a lot of these receiving situations, you've got a lot of question marks where you've got question marks at who's going to be in the game or who is going to really get the production. So I think, this is a slate where you could play it really safe with some of these names that we talked about, or you could kind of go for broke and gamble on some of these teams who have big time receivers in the portal and play some of these lower price guys and hope that they just pop off for a big game. I think they're both viable strategies. It's all going to depend on how you want to play it out though, as you build your lineups here for this 7-game Saturday slate. All right. That does it. Oh, my voice is limping to the finish line here. So that does it for our preview of this 7-game Saturday college football DFS bowl season slate. Reminder, we will be back for the rest of bowl season after Christmas. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the audio feed as well, wherever you get your podcasts. So that way you'll be notified when there's new episodes drop and you can listen to them right on release. And also, while you're here, if you like what you see on these videos, you like what you hear on the podcast, please like the video on YouTube. It helps them get noticed, and I really do appreciate it. If you're listening on audio, please rate and review the podcast. It really helps me out a lot. I really do appreciate it. You guys are the best community around. And remember, if you want more from me, follow me on X at Mike's Money Picks. Link to the Fantasy Corner Discord is in the description, and then a link to the Patreon for those articles is in the description as well. All right, that does it here for this slate. So if you are here just for the college football episodes, and I don't see you again until the next college football episode, hope you have a very Merry Christmas. Enjoy your holiday. Enjoy this great time of the year for being a sports fan in general, and enjoy some time with family, because I know I'm going to as well. So that does it here for this episode. We will be back hopefully tomorrow with the NFL episode. Stay tuned for that one. But other than that, that's all I got for today, guys. Best of luck to you with all your DFS endeavors. Best of luck to you guys this weekend. Hopefully I was able to give you guys some information that's going to help you build a lineup. Thank you guys for watching and listening, and I will see you next time.